Academically dumb. The words hang in the air like poison as Imani Collins clutches her trembling hands behind the graduation podium. The microphone captures her ragged breath. Silence blankets the auditorium. 3,000 eyes bore into her, waiting. In the third row, Mr. Garrett Pierce shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his face a mask of stone. He doesn't meet her gaze. He can't. Academically dumb, Imani repeats, her voice stronger now, filling the shocked silence. That's what my chemistry teacher called me during my freshman year. Not to my face. No, he said it behind closed doors, to my guidance counselor. She pauses, allowing the gasps to ripple through the crowd. Parents exchange glances. Students straighten in their seats. The valedictorian medal feels like fire against Imani's chest as she leans forward, her knuckles white against the podium. He said I lacked the intellectual capacity for advanced courses, that I should know my limitations, that I'd never make it. A tear escapes down her cheek, but her voice doesn't waver. She reaches beneath the podium and pulls out a worn, tattered notebook, holding it high for everyone to see. This is the notebook where I wrote down every single doubtful thought, every moment of pain, every time I wanted to give up. Her voice cracks, and next to each one, I wrote a promise to myself. She locks eyes with Mr. Pierce now, and for the first time in 4 years, he's the one who looks away first. Today, Imani says, power rising in her voice, I'm going to tell you about a journey that started with those 2 devastating words and ended here, with the highest GPA in Ridgewood High's history. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. It's amazing to see our community tuning in from all over the world. All right, back to our story. 3 years earlier, on a crisp September morning, 14-year-old Imani had walked through the doors of Ridgewood High with wide eyes and wider dreams. The building seemed massive then, a maze of possibilities. Freshman year, a fresh start. She'd spent the summer preparing, reading ahead in her textbooks, particularly excited about diving into the sciences. Imani had always had an affinity for numbers and equations. In her bedroom at home, she kept a worn notebook filled with problems she'd solved just for fun, complex equations and chemical formulas that made perfect sense to her, even when the world outside sometimes didn't. In that notebook, she was free. There were no judgments, no preconceptions, just the pure, beautiful logic of mathematics and science. Baby girl, you're gonna blow them all away. Her mother Denise had said that morning, pressing a kiss to Imani's forehead before rushing off to catch the bus to the hospital where she worked night shifts as a nurse. It was just the 2 of them at home, had been since Imani was 7, but Denise Collins made sure her daughter never felt the absence of others. She worked double shifts, sometimes triple, to ensure Imani had everything she needed to succeed. By third period on that first day, Imani found herself sitting near the back of Mr. Pierce's AP chemistry class. She'd heard about him, a demanding teacher with impressive credentials who had taught at Ridgewood for nearly 20 years. His reputation preceded him, tough but brilliant. Exactly the kind of teacher Imani had hoped for. Mr. Pierce was tall, with salt and pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that he frequently pushed up his nose while speaking. He paced the front of the classroom with confidence, scanning the room as he talked about the year ahead. Chemistry separates the serious students from the ones who are just passing time, he said, his eyes moving from face to face. By winter break, I'll know which of you belong here and which of you don't. When his gaze landed on Imani, it lingered for a moment longer than it had on others. She sat up straighter, determined to make a good impression. This was her chance to excel, to challenge herself with the most rigorous coursework the school offered. She belonged here. She knew it in her bones. The first few weeks passed in a blur of new routines, new faces, and increasingly difficult homework. Imani spent hours at her desk each night, working through problem sets, occasionally texting questions to her new friend Tyler Washington, another freshman who shared her passion for science. It happened on a Wednesday, 6 weeks into the semester. Mr. Pierce was explaining valence electrons, chalk dust coating his fingers as he drew diagrams on the blackboard. The class was quiet, attentive, all except for 2 boys in the corner who kept whispering and snickering behind their textbooks. "Perhaps," Mr. Pierce said sharply, turning to face the class, "one of you would like to explain the relationship between valence electrons and chemical reactivity?" His eyes settled on the disruptive boys, then deliberately shifted to Imani. "Miss Collins, why don't you enlighten us?" Imani felt her heart quicken. She knew this. She'd read ahead last weekend, had even worked on some practice problems. But as 30 pairs of eyes turned to her, the carefully prepared thoughts in her head scattered like marbles on a hard floor. "Valence electrons they're the electrons in the outer shell," she began, her voice smaller than she intended. "And they determine how they react with other elements." "Go on," Mr. Pierce said, crossing his arms. His expression gave nothing away. "The more valence electrons, the more stable the element is," Imani continued, gaining confidence. "Elements want to have a full outer shell, like the noble gases, so they'll bond with." "Incorrect," Mr. Pierce interrupted. "Or at least, woefully incomplete. You've missed the fundamental principle entirely." Imani felt her face grow hot. The number of valence electrons determines an element's chemical properties," he continued, turning back to the board as if Imani's answer was too worthless to merit further attention. "The reactivity depends on whether the atom tends to lose, gain, or share electrons to achieve a stable configuration. This is basic material, Miss Collins. Remedial, at best." The classroom fell silent. Even the disruptive boys stopped their whispering, uncomfortable with the harshness of Mr. Pierce's response. Imani stared at her notebook, vision blurring slightly as she fought back tears. She had known that, had just stumbled over her words. But now it was too late. The judgment had been passed. "Some students," Mr. Pierce added, addressing the whole class but still standing near Imani's desk, "simply aren't suited for advanced placement courses. Better to recognize one's limitations early than to struggle unnecessarily." The bell rang moments later, a merciful end to Imani's humiliation. She gathered her books quickly, head down, and was the first out the door. In the hallway, she nearly ran to the bathroom, locking herself in a stall until her breathing steadied and the burning in her eyes subsided. What had gone wrong? Had she really misunderstood something so fundamental? Or had she just frozen under pressure? Either way, the message had been clear. Mr. Pierce didn't think she belonged in his class. Later that afternoon, Imani was returning a book to the library when she heard voices from the open door of the guidance counselor's office. She recognized Mr. Pierce's distinctive tone immediately and slowed her steps. "I'm concerned about several of my AP chemistry students," he was saying, "particularly Imani Collins. Based on her performance so far, I believe she was misplaced." "Imani?" Ms. Winters, the counselor, sounded surprised. Her middle school records were exemplary. All her teachers recommended her for advanced placement. "Middle school is one thing," Mr. Pierce replied dismissively. "High school AP courses are another matter entirely. The girl is frankly, academically dumb. Not college material, certainly not AP material. She'd be better served in the regular chemistry section, where she might actually keep up." Imani froze, the returned book clutched against her chest like a shield. "Academically dumb." The words pierced through her, sharp and cold. She'd been called many things before. Too quiet, too serious, too bookish, but never dumb. Never incapable. "That seems premature," Ms. Winters was saying. "It's only October. Perhaps with some additional support." "I've been teaching for 20 years, Mr. Pierce interrupted. "I know which students have potential and which are wasting my time and theirs. Imani Collins lacks the intellectual capacity for advanced science courses. Moving her now would be a kindness." Imani didn't wait to hear more. She backed away silently, then turned and walked swiftly down the hallway, past the library, past the cafeteria, all the way to the east stairwell where no one went during fifth period. There, in the quiet, dusty corner, she finally let the tears come. "Academically dumb. Not college material. Lacks intellectual capacity." The words played on repeat in her mind, each iteration cutting deeper than the last. All her life, Imani had built her identity around her intelligence, her love of learning. It was the one thing she felt truly confident about, the one area where she knew her worth. And now, this teacher, this respected educator with 20 years of experience, had dismissed her entirely. What if he was right? The thought terrified her more than the humiliation, more than the unfairness. What if she really wasn't smart enough? What if all her dreams, of college scholarships, of a career in science, of making her mother proud, were built on a false understanding of her own abilities? By the time Imani arrived home that afternoon, the tears had dried, leaving behind a hollow feeling in her chest. Their apartment was empty. Her mother wouldn't be home until after midnight, which meant there was no one to notice how quiet Imani was, how she picked at her dinner instead of eating it, how she stared at her chemistry textbook for an hour without opening it. For the first time since she could remember, Imani Collins was afraid of learning, afraid of trying, afraid of discovering that the person she thought she was, bright, capable, destined for success, was nothing but a comforting fiction. What she didn't know, as she finally fell into a restless sleep that night, was that this moment of deepest doubt would become the catalyst for her greatest triumph. That the teacher who called her dumb would one day watch in disbelief as she took the valedictorian's podium. That the words meant to diminish her would ultimately fuel a fire that nothing and no one could extinguish. But that awakening was still to come. Tonight, in the darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by the textbooks and notebooks that had always been her refuge, Imani could only hear Mr. Pierce's verdict echoing in her mind. Academically dumb, not college material, better off giving up now. And for the first time in her life, she wondered if it might be easier to simply believe him. The smell of fresh coffee and cinnamon filled the small kitchen as Denise Collins moved around with practiced efficiency, preparing breakfast before collapsing into bed after her 12-hour shift. Imani sat at the table, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate, her chemistry textbook open but untouched beside her. "You're quiet this morning," Denise said, studying her daughter with the keen observation that made her an excellent nurse. "Something happened at school yesterday?" Imani shrugged, avoiding her mother's eyes. "Just tired." Denise hummed, unconvinced. She sat down across from Imani, reached out, and gently closed the textbook. "Look at me, baby girl." Reluctantly, Imani raised her eyes to meet her mother's gaze. "Whatever it is, it's got you tied up in knots," Denise said softly. "I can't help if I don't know what's wrong." The dam broke. Words tumbled out in a rush. The classroom humiliation, the overheard conversation, the crushing weight of being labeled academically dumb. By the time Imani finished, tears streamed down her face, and Denise had moved to kneel beside her chair, clasping her daughter's hands tightly in her own. "Now you listen to me," Denise said, her voice low and fierce. "I don't care what letters come after that man's name or how many years he's been teaching. He does not get to define who you are." "But what if he's right?" Imani whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I'm not smart enough?" Denise's expression hardened. "Your grandmother, my mama, cleaned university offices for 30 years. You know what she told me? She said the difference between the professors and the students wasn't who was born smarter. It was who refused to give up." She squeezed Imani's hands. "You come from a long line of women who don't quit. You hear me?" Imani nodded slowly, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "And another thing," Denise continued, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten in the fire of maternal protection. "Don't you dare drop that AP class. But, no buts. You stay in that class, and you work twice as hard. Not to prove anything to him, to prove it to yourself. Because once you start letting other people tell you what you can't do, they'll never stop." The words sank into Imani's heart, not immediately healing the wound, but planting a seed that would eventually grow stronger than the doubt. She went to school that day with her mother's words echoing in her ears, alongside Mr. Pierce's dismissal. Two opposing forces battling for control of her future. In chemistry class, she sat in the same seat, though everything felt different. Mr. Pierce barely acknowledged her, his attention deliberately focused on other students, the ones he deemed worthy of his time. Imani took meticulous notes, her head bent low over her notebook, trying to become invisible even as she absorbed every word. For 2 weeks, She existed in this state of determined invisibility, present but unseen, working harder than ever but sharing none of her thoughts or questions. She spent lunch periods in the library, sacrificed sleep to review concepts multiple times, and filled her notebook with increasingly complex problems and solutions. But the spark, the joy she'd once found in learning, remained extinguished, replaced by a grim determination born of defiance rather than passion. It was Tyler who noticed first, cornering her after class one day in late October. "What's going on with you?" he asked, falling into step beside her in the crowded hallway. "You haven't said a word in Pierce's class for weeks. That's not like you." Imani shrugged, clutching her books tighter. "Just focusing on the work." "Yeah, but you love this stuff," Tyler persisted. "You used to light up talking about chemistry. Now you look like you're marching to your execution every time we have class." She almost told him then, about the humiliation, about the words that had branded themselves into her consciousness. But the thought of seeing pity in his eyes stopped her. Instead, she mumbled something about being tired and hurried away, leaving Tyler staring after her with concern written across his face. That afternoon, seeking a quiet place to study, Imani slipped into what she thought was an empty classroom. Instead, she found herself in the domain of Ms. Chenoa Blackwood, the new science teacher who had joined Ridgewood's faculty that fall. Unlike the sterile precision of Mr. Pierce's classroom, Ms. Blackwood's space was alive with color. Posters of women scientists adorned the walls, plants thrived on the windowsills, and a quote by Mae Jemison was painted in bold letters above the blackboard. "Never be limited by other people's limited imaginations." Ms. Blackwood looked up from her desk, surprise giving way to a warm smile. "Well, hello there. Are you looking for someone?" "Sorry," Imani said quickly, backing toward the door. "I thought the room was empty. I'll go." "No need to run off," Ms. Blackwood replied, gesturing to an empty desk. "I'm just grading papers. You're welcome to study here if you like." Something about the teacher's easy manner made Imani hesitate, then slowly step into the room. She settled at a desk near the window, spreading out her chemistry notes and textbook. For several minutes, the only sounds were the scratch of Ms. Blackwood's pen and the rustle of pages turning. "Chemistry, huh?" Ms. Blackwood commented, glancing at Imani's materials. "One of my favorite subjects." "Who's your teacher?" "Mr. Pierce," Imani answered, the name feeling bitter on her tongue. "Ah," Ms. Blackwood nodded, a flicker of something recognition? Understanding? Crossing her face. "AP Chemistry. That's challenging material for a freshman." Imani tensed, waiting for the inevitable hint of doubt, the suggestion that perhaps she'd aimed too high. Instead, Ms. Blackwood smiled again. "I took AP Chemistry as a freshman too," she said casually. "Nearly failed the first semester. By the end of the year, I had the highest grade in the class." Imani looked up in surprise. "What changed?" "I stopped trying to memorize everything and started understanding the why behind the what." Ms. Blackwood set down her pen. "And I found someone who believed in me, my physics teacher. He saw past my stumbles to the scientist underneath." The words struck a chord in Imani. Someone who believed in her. Her mother did, of course, but Denise wasn't a scientist. She couldn't help with the complexities of chemistry, couldn't guide Imani through the labyrinth of formulas and reactions that sometimes left her lost and confused. "I'm struggling with some of it," Imani admitted, the confession slipping out before she could stop it. Ms. Blackwood's eyes softened. "That's not surprising. It's tough material. Anything specific giving you trouble?" Before Imani could respond, her notebook slid from the edge of the desk, falling open on the floor between them. She lunged for it, but not before Ms. Blackwood glimpsed the pages. Not class notes as one might expect, but original problems Imani had created and solved on her own, explorations that went well beyond the AP curriculum. Ms. Blackwood stared at the notebook, then at Imani, her expression shifting from surprise to something Imani couldn't quite read. "Did you do this work on your own?" she asked quietly. Heat rushed to Imani's face as she clutched the notebook close. "It's just stuff I do sometimes. For fun." "For fun," Ms. Blackwood repeated, a smile spreading across her face. "You know, most students don't derive complex chemical equations for fun." That's usually reserved for chemistry majors or future scientists. The simple validation in those words, the acknowledgement that what Imani did naturally might actually mean something, cracked open the shell of doubt that had hardened around her heart these past weeks. Mr. Pierce thinks I'm not smart enough for his class, Imani blurted out, the words escaping before she could contain them. He said I'm academically dumb. Ms. Blackwood's expression darkened. He said what? Not to me directly, Imani clarified. I overheard him talking to the guidance counselor. He wants me moved to regular chemistry. For a moment, Ms. Blackwood was silent, her jaw working as if she was carefully choosing her next words. When she spoke, her voice was controlled but intense. May I see your notebook again? Just for a moment. Hesitantly, Imani handed it over. Ms. Blackwood flipped through the pages slowly, her eyebrows rising higher with each turn. When she looked up, there was a fierce certainty in her eyes. Imani, I don't know what Mr. Pierce thinks he sees when he looks at you, but what I'm looking at right now is extraordinary talent. This, she tapped the notebook, is not the work of someone who's academically dumb. This is the work of someone with a natural gift for understanding chemical principles at an intuitive level. The words washed over Imani like a warm wave, beginning to dissolve the knot of shame and doubt that had taken residence in her chest. But I couldn't even answer his question correctly in class, she said softly. Freezing under pressure doesn't mean you don't understand the material, Miss Blackwood replied. It means you're human. And from what I see here, you understand chemistry far better than most students your age. She closed the notebook and handed it back to Imani. Have you ever considered joining Science Olympiad? I'm the faculty advisor this year. Imani shook her head. I didn't think I'd be good enough. Well, I think you'd be perfect for it, Miss Blackwood said firmly. We meet Tuesdays and Thursdays after school. No pressure, but I'd love to see you there. The invitation hung in the air between them, not just to join a club, but to step back into believing in herself. Imani felt something small and fragile unfurling in her chest. Not quite confidence, not yet, but perhaps its precursor, possibility. I'll think about it, she said finally. Good, Miss Blackwood smiled. And Imani, if you ever want help with your AP chemistry material, or just a quiet place to work, my door is always open. As autumn gave way to winter, a subtle transformation took place in Imani Collins. She began attending Science Olympiad meetings, where Ms. Blackwood created an environment that celebrated curiosity and persistence above perfect answers. There, Imani found herself part of a community that spoke her language, the language of hypotheses and experiments, of wonder and discovery. For the first time since entering high school, she felt herself expanding rather than contracting. The district competition is in February, Ms. Blackwood announced one Thursday in early December. We need to select team members for each event. She unfolded a sheet of paper. For chemistry lab, I'm recommending Imani Collins and Tyler Washington. A ripple of approving nods moved through the group. In just 2 months, Imani had proven herself an intuitive chemist, often seeing solutions that eluded even the senior students. Tyler grinned at her from across the table, offering a fist bump that she returned with a small smile. You sure you want to do this? He asked as they packed up their materials. It means a lot of extra work, and with Pierce already riding you so hard. Imani glanced toward Ms. Blackwood, who was speaking with another student, but somehow seemed to sense the conversation, meeting Imani's eyes with an encouraging nod. I'm sure, Imani said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Later that day, as Imani hurried through the nearly empty halls to catch her bus, a familiar voice stopped her cold. Miss Collins. Mr. Pierce stood in the doorway of his classroom, arms crossed, his expression unreadable behind those wire-rimmed glasses. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes, Mr. Pierce. I understand you've joined Science Olympiad, he said, the words clipped and precise. With Ms. Blackwood. It wasn't a question, but Imani nodded anyway. I find it curious, he continued, that you would commit to such an academically rigorous extracurricular when you're already struggling to maintain adequate performance in my class. The words were designed to cut, to remind her of her supposed limitations. 2 months ago, they would have succeeded. But now, with Ms. Blackwood's validation and her own growing confidence serving as a shield, Imani felt only a dull ache where once there would have been a sharp wound. "I'm working hard to improve, sir," she replied, proud that her voice remained steady. "My last quiz score was a B+. Something flickered across Mr. Pierce's face. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation that she hadn't wilted under his implied criticism. "A single quiz is hardly indicative of overall aptitude," he said dismissively. "I would hate to see you spread yourself too thin and fail at both endeavors." There it was again, the casual certainty of her failure, delivered as if he were merely stating a fact rather than making a prediction. Imani felt heat rise to her face, not from shame this time, but from a slow-burning anger. "Thank you for your concern," she managed, the politeness a thin veneer over her true feelings. "But I think I'll be okay." Without waiting for his response, she turned and continued down the hall, her back straight and her steps measured until she rounded the corner. Only then did she allow herself a shaky breath, leaning against the cold metal of a locker. He still had the power to rattle her, that much was clear, but he no longer had the power to stop her. That night, Imani started a new notebook. On the first page, she wrote, "Promises to myself." And beneath it, the first entry, "I will never again let someone else's words define my capabilities." The winter months passed in a flurry of activity. The Science Olympiad competition approached, and Imani and Tyler spent hours in Ms. Blackwood's classroom after school, perfecting their chemistry project. When the district competition arrived, Imani found herself standing on stage, gold medal around her neck, having earned the highest score in the event's history. As she accepted the medal, her eyes scanned the audience, finding Ms. Blackwood's beaming face. Then, involuntarily, shifting to where Mr. Pierce sat among the judges. His expression was unreadable, his applause perfunctory at best. "It doesn't matter," Imani told herself, feeling the welcome weight of the medal against her chest. "I didn't do this for him." The victory catapulted Imani into a new stratum at Ridgewood. Teachers who had barely noticed her before now stopped her in the hallway to offer congratulations. Fellow students who had witnessed her humiliation in Mr. Pierce's class months earlier now looked at her with newfound respect. By sophomore year, Imani had found her stride. She maintained perfect grades not just in science but across all subjects, joined the math team alongside Science Olympiad, and began tutoring younger students during study hall. Word of her achievements spread throughout Ridgewood, earning her respect from most teachers and students, with one notable exception. Mr. Pierce's skepticism evolved rather than disappeared. Unable to question her grades or test scores, he found new ways to express doubt, suggesting her written work showed sufficient technical understanding but limited creative insight, or speculating aloud whether college-level science would prove too conceptually demanding for certain students regardless of their high school performance. Imani weathered these comments with outward calm, adding each one to her mental reservoir of fuel. In her promises notebook, which had grown to include over a dozen entries, she wrote, "I will remember that his limitations are not mine to carry." By the middle of junior year, Imani's place at the top of her class was firmly established. The guidance counselor called her in for a meeting, something unprecedented for a non-senior. "I wanted to discuss your trajectory," Ms. Winters said, the same counselor who had once heard Mr. Pierce dismiss Imani as academically dumb. If she remembered that conversation, she gave no indication. "Based on your current standing, you're on track to be valedictorian next year." The word hung in the air, simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Valedictorian, the highest academic honor a student could achieve, the ultimate refutation of Mr. Pierce's judgment. "That's assuming you maintain your GPA," Ms. Winters continued. "The competition at the top is always fierce in senior year." "I understand," Imani said softly, already calculating the work required to maintain her position. It would mean perfect grades across all subjects, including Mr. Pierce's notoriously difficult advanced placement chemistry course, which she would take as a senior. "Just something to be aware of," Ms. Winters said with a smile. Though I have to say, based on your performance so far, I wouldn't bet against you. As spring approached, Ms. Blackwood suggested Imani apply for the prestigious Pearson Summer Science Institute, an intensive program that accepted only 30 high school students nationwide. It's highly competitive, but with your project and recommendations, you'd have a strong chance. The application required 3 teacher recommendations. Ms. Blackwood volunteered immediately, as did Imani's calculus teacher. But the third recommendation needed to come from an AP science instructor, which meant Mr. Pierce. He'll say no, Imani said softly when Ms. Blackwood brought it up. Or worse, he'll write something that hurts my chances. Perhaps, Ms. Blackwood acknowledged. But consider this. You've proven him wrong repeatedly this year. Your competition results are irrefutable. Your recent grades in his class are excellent. He may surprise you. She paused. And if he doesn't, that tells the committee more about him than about you. That afternoon, Imani stayed after class, heart hammering as students filed out, leaving her alone with Mr. Pierce. He glanced up from his desk, his expression neutral but not overtly hostile. Miss Collins, do you have a question about today's material? No, sir, Imani said, gathering her courage. I wanted to ask if you would write a recommendation letter for my application to the Pearson Summer Science Institute. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, that she would ask, or that she would aim for such a selective program. The Pearson Institute, he repeated slowly. That's a very competitive program, typically for students with exceptional scientific aptitude. The emphasis on exceptional carried his familiar implication that she was anything but. Yes, sir, Imani replied, maintaining eye contact despite her racing heart. Ms. Blackwood suggested I apply. She thinks I have a chance. Ms. Blackwood is relatively new to teaching, he said, the dismissal evident in his tone. Her perspective on student potential is, let's say, less tempered by experience than my own. Imani felt a flash of anger on Ms. Blackwood's behalf, but kept her expression neutral. I understand if you don't feel comfortable writing a recommendation, she said, proud of how steady her voice remained. I just thought I should ask, since you've been my chemistry teacher all year. Mr. Pierce studied her for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Your recent work has shown improvement, he conceded reluctantly. Though I maintain that science at this level requires a natural aptitude that cannot be replaced by mere diligence. Imani absorbed the backhanded compliment without flinching. So, will you write the letter? He sighed, as if her persistence was wearing on his limited patience. I will write an honest assessment of your capabilities as I have observed them. Whether that benefits your application is not for me to predict. It wasn't the enthusiastic support she might have hoped for, but it was better than an outright refusal. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. The application is due next Friday. The acceptance letter from Pearson arrived 2 months later, validating what Ms. Blackwood had seen all along, Imani's exceptional talent for science. Whatever Mr. Pierce had written, it hadn't prevented the admissions committee from recognizing her potential. When senior year began that fall, Imani entered Mr. Pierce's AP chemistry class with her head high, taking a seat in the front row, a deliberate choice to signal that she would not hide, would not be intimidated, would claim her space in the academic arena he had once deemed beyond her reach. The valedictorian race had begun, and she was leading the pack. But Mr. Pierce had one final test in store, a project-based assignment that would account for 30% of the semester grade. As he described the requirements, original research, experimental application, theoretical analysis, Imani recognized the challenge for what it was, his last chance to prove his initial judgment right. Her last chance to prove it irrevocably wrong. This project will separate those with genuine scientific minds from those who merely follow instructions well, he announced, his gaze lingering briefly on Imani. The implication was clear. He still doubted whether she belonged in the former category. Imani accepted the assignment with outward calm, already mapping out her approach. What Mr. Pierce didn't realize was that in attempting to place one final obstacle in her path, he had inadvertently created the perfect opportunity for her to demonstrate just how wrong he had been about her all along. For weeks, Imani devoted herself to her senior project with single-minded focus. She chose to investigate catalytic reactions in environmental remediation, specifically how certain compounds might accelerate the breakdown of pollutants in water systems. The research required hours in the lab after school, careful documentation of results, and complex mathematical modeling to predict reaction rates under various conditions. The night before the project was due, after hundreds of trials and adjustments, Imani made a breakthrough. She identified a novel catalytic process that significantly increased efficiency in breaking down a common industrial pollutant. The implications were substantial, potentially offering a more cost-effective method for water treatment in communities like her own. When she finally printed the 50-page report, exhaustion mingled with a profound sense of accomplishment. This was the culmination of a journey that had begun with two devastating words, academically dumb, and would end with irrefutable evidence of her exceptional scientific mind. A week after submission, Mr. Pierce addressed the class with a grave expression. "I've reviewed your projects," he said, lifting a familiar report from his desk. Most were adequate. A few showed genuine scientific thinking. And one. He paused, fixing his gaze on Imani. One submission presents work that is, frankly, beyond the capabilities of a high school student. The classroom fell silent. Imani sat perfectly still, processing his words with growing disbelief. "Ms. Collins," Mr. Pierce continued, his voice sharp, "would you care to explain how a senior in high school managed to produce doctoral-level research on catalytic environmental remediation? Or perhaps you'd prefer to acknowledge your sources more honestly." The implication hung in the air, clear and cutting. He was accusing her of cheating. After everything, the years of proving herself, the countless hours of study, he still refused to believe in her capability. "I did the work myself, Mr. Pierce," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "Every calculation, every experiment, every word in that report is mine." "That's simply not credible," he replied dismissively. "The level of analysis exceeds what could reasonably be expected from someone at your educational stage." "I've had additional training," Imani pointed out. "The Pearson Institute, Science Olympiad, independent research with Ms. Blackwood. I've been preparing for months." Mr. Pierce's expression hardened. "I have no choice but to give you an incomplete grade until you can verify your sources and contribution." An incomplete grade this late in senior year could jeopardize her valedictorian status. For a moment, Imani was speechless, the unfairness too great to process. It was Tyler who broke the silence. "That's not right," he said, standing from his desk. "I saw her working on that project for weeks. She was in the lab until midnight most nights. She didn't cheat." "I can verify it too," came another voice, a quiet girl named Lily. "I'm in study center 6th period. Imani's been working on those calculations for over a month." Before Mr. Pierce could respond, another student spoke up, then another, classmates who had witnessed Imani's dedication, who knew what she was capable of. Mr. Pierce's face flushed, but he held his ground. "If Ms. Collins wishes to dispute my academic judgment, she may take the matter to administration." 3 days later, Imani found herself in the principal's office, facing a panel that included Ms. Winters, the science department head, and Dr. Harris, the principal himself. Her mother sat beside her, while Ms. Blackwood attended as a faculty advocate. Mr. Pierce presented his case, highlighting sections of the report he deemed suspiciously sophisticated, equations that were improbably advanced, conclusions that showed implausible insight. When he finished, Dr. Harris turned to Imani. "How do you respond to these concerns?" Imani took a deep breath. This was the moment for which all her promises had prepared her. She reached into her backpack and removed a worn notebook filled with calculations, false starts, crossed-out hypotheses, and gradual breakthroughs. "This is my research notebook," she said, opening it on the table. "It documents every step of my process, from initial concept to final conclusions. Every mistake, every revision, every moment of progress is recorded here." Ms. Blackwood leaned forward. "This notebook shows something crucially important, the messy reality of actual research. A student who was cheating would present only polished work. These pages show genuine scientific process. Mr. Pierce remained skeptical. A research notebook can be fabricated after the fact. It was then that Imani opened her laptop. I anticipated that concern, she said quietly. So I documented my process in other ways. She played video clips of herself working through calculations at various stages, explaining her thinking as she progressed. She presented spreadsheets, charts, even photographs of failed experiments with handwritten notes about what went wrong. The evidence was overwhelming, not just of her innocence, but of her extraordinary commitment and scientific rigor. As the presentation continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. Only Mr. Pierce remained unmoved, his posture rigid behind wire-rimmed glasses. When Imani finished, he immediately began questioning specific technical aspects of her work, clearly expecting she would falter. Instead, Imani met each question with calm precision, breaking down complex processes into clear explanations, demonstrating not just that she had done the work, but that she understood it deeply. Mr. Pierce, Dr. Harris finally interrupted, I believe we've established that Ms. Collins has a comprehensive understanding of her project. The evidence supporting her authorship is substantial and convincing. If I may add something, Ms. Blackwood said, what we're witnessing isn't just a defense of academic integrity. We're seeing the results of extraordinary potential that was recognized and nurtured despite initial skepticism. She looked directly at Mr. Pierce. Sometimes our greatest responsibility as educators is to acknowledge when our first assessments were incorrect. Dr. Harris's ruling was definitive. Based on the evidence presented, I find no grounds for an academic integrity violation. Imani's project will be graded on its merits, with no presumption against its authenticity. 2 weeks later, the final class rankings were announced. Imani Collins, valedictorian of Ridgewood High School, with the highest GPA in the school's history. Which brings us back to graduation day, to Imani standing at the podium, facing the teacher who once called her dumb, her promises notebook open before her. I could talk about perseverance, she continued, her voice carrying across the silent auditorium. About working twice as hard to prove yourself. About turning doubt into determination. Those are all valuable lessons I've learned. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces, at her mother, at Ms. Blackwood, at Tyler, and finally at Mr. Pierce. But what I really want to talk about is something more fundamental. The danger of underestimation and the power of those who refuse to accept it. When someone decides who you are before truly seeing you, when they place a ceiling on your potential based on their own limited vision, they're participating in something harmful. It doesn't just affect individuals. It ripples outward, reinforcing systems that have historically denied opportunity to those deemed not quite capable enough. Her words hung in the air, resonating with parents who had fought for their children's opportunities, teachers who had witnessed similar struggles, students who saw reflections of their own battles in Imani's story. While we can't control how others see us, we absolutely can control how we see ourselves, she continued. Every time someone told me, directly or indirectly, that I didn't belong in advanced classes, that my success must be luck or cheating, that certain achievements were beyond my reach, I had a choice. She turned a page in her journal. I chose to believe in myself, even when it was difficult, even when doubt crept in during late nights of study, even when it seemed easier to accept the limitations others had set for me. As applause thundered through the auditorium, Imani felt something unexpected, not triumph over Mr. Pierce, but a sense of having transcended the need for his validation entirely. After the ceremony, as families mingled on the sunny lawn, Mr. Pierce approached her, extending his hand. Congratulations on your achievement, Miss Collins. Imani accepted the handshake, feeling the strangeness of this final interaction, so different from the power dynamic that had defined their relationship for 4 years. I owe you an apology, he said after a moment, the words clearly difficult for him. My assessment of your capabilities was incorrect. Your work this year, particularly your final project, was genuinely exceptional. The apology was brief, perhaps less than she deserved, but Imani recognized what it had cost his pride to offer it at all. Thank you for saying that, she replied simply. If I may ask, he said, curiosity overcoming his usual reserve. "What are your plans after graduation?" "MIT," she answered. "I've been offered a full scholarship to study chemical engineering." Something like genuine respect flickered across his features. "They're fortunate to have you." 3 months later, Imani stood in her dormitory room at MIT, unpacking the last of her belongings. She placed her valedictorian medal on her desk, beside the framed photo of her mother and Ms. Blackwood at graduation. Next to it, she set her worn promises notebook, open to the final entry she had written the night before leaving for college. "I will remember that validation from others is never as important as staying true to myself." From her window, she could see students crisscrossing the campus below, each on their own journey of discovery. Somewhere among them were other Imanis, students told they couldn't, they shouldn't, they wouldn't succeed. Students for whom one person's limitation might become either a crushing weight or a stepping stone, depending on whether they found the strength to reject it. As she joined the flow of students heading to their first classes, Imani carried with her not just the knowledge she had fought to acquire, but the wisdom she had earned through struggle. She understood now that the most important validation comes not from proving others wrong, but from proving yourself right, from honoring your own potential, your own vision of what's possible. The journey that began with 2 devastating words, academically dumb, had led her here, to this prestigious institution, to this bright future full of possibility. But more importantly, it had led her to an unshakable truth, that no one else gets to define the limits of your capability. That precious right belongs to you alone. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Have you or someone you know ever being underestimated or judged unfairly? Drop a comment below, share your story. Subscribe for more powerful stories of injustice, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.